Welcome to SPED 780, Mathematics in the Inclusive Classroom. In this module, we're going to take a look at some common strategies for math instruction in an inclusive setting. We're going to take a look at what the data tells us about student proficiency, student mastery in math at this time. And then we're going to really look closely at what do math deficits look like and what's impacting those math deficits. Finally, we'll end with some assessment information, IEP goals, and looking at accommodations and modifications for the IEP specific to math. But I first want you to have a really good understanding, as I've done in the other previous content areas, of kind of where our students with special needs sit in terms of math achievement, where Kansas sits, kind of what the national results look like. So what I want to show you here first is the 8th grade NAEP math results. So we're looking here at data all the way back to 1992 when we're looking at Kansas on proficiency levels in math. Okay, so you'll notice there in the NAEP they identify basic, proficient, and advanced as the three areas that they're looking for on the scale score. And so you'll notice here that nationally, right now, 241 is kind of the average, okay, and 250 is our cutoff for proficiency. So nationally, students in math are not hitting that proficient level. They're not averaging that. In Kansas, we're at 240, so we're really close. You'll notice that the gap has kind of changed there, and it's getting a little bit closer to where Kansas students are performing in the same general way that students are nationally. And again, consistently, those numbers are low. You will notice, though, there's been some good growth in proficiency levels since 1992. In 92, the average student was performing at the basic level. So we're getting closer to that proficiency level. But we're still lacking in students achieving those math results we're looking for. Now, if we look at 8th grade math results just for students with disabilities and look at those scale scores, those students are typically performing under the basic level. So they're at 247 in 2015 on that assessment as their scale score average. And you'll notice in Kansas, we've had some growth since 96, but we're kind of starting another trend down, which is interesting. Hitting 2011 our highest mark of 250 on those proficiency tests. So when we go back and look at kind of assessment results of students with disabilities compared to students without disabilities, we're still seeing a really big gap. And unfortunately, we're seeing that gap grow from 8th grade to 12th grade. One of the important things that I want you to take a look at in this module is there's an article about math and students with learning disabilities and how the brain impacts our understanding of math skills. Math is a really hard concept, especially for our students with disabilities, and it requires the brain to work in multiple areas to be able to produce understanding of math, to be able to show our understanding, and to really process all the information that's going on. This is a great example from LB online about how the brain looks at math and how we solve math problems, which I think is really interesting. So this involves a lot of different things, right? We've got motor coordination going on when we're looking at calculating problems, and that's happening in that motor cortex. You'll see the very top of the brain, kind of in a gray color. And then in the Exner's area, we've got writing numbers. Okay, so that's happening there. And then the Broca's area, we've got expressive language and sequencing. So this is where our brain is really processing those word problems of sequencing the tasks that we have to go through to be able to solve that word problem. That can be a really hard skill for our students to know. And so I just want you to take a close look at this and really read that article and think about what it says about brain development and math calculations, math computation, because it really plays a significant role in how our students are learning. I think it helps us better look at the student in terms of what areas they're really struggling with, and also allows us then to identify some really key strategies and accommodations that are going to address those areas that they're struggling with. So when we look at math deficits, kiddos can kind of have 4 general areas that they can struggle with in math. Okay, the first one is mastering those basic number facts. Okay, the first thing they have to learn and understand is that one-to-one correspondence, right? When we look at a problem and we know 1 plus 1 equals 2. Okay, that's a simple step, but that's really a building block foundation to understanding math. And so a lot of times it's hard when students don't know their math facts, don't have this basic number fact mastery to be able to move on and do some more challenging computation within math. And so we're going to look at some accommodations and modifications we can use for students that really struggle with that mastering basic number facts. The other area is just arithmetic weakness. So I love this quote I read in an article. It said students can be reliably unreliable at paying attention to the operational sign, at borrowing and carrying appropriately, at sequencing the steps in complex operations. Okay, so that's just showing us arithmetic weakness. Those students also that have arithmetic weakness can also have some weakness mastering those basic number facts. So sometimes those can go hand in hand. Written symbol systems and concrete examples can also be challenging for students. Math has very specific symbols that are used that students have to be able to understand, whether that's plus and minus, division, greater than, less than. Being able to interpret those for students, interpret them accurately, can be a challenge. The other big piece of math that we're going to take a really close look at is the language of math. And I feel like this was one area that the book didn't necessarily talk about, and so I kind of wanted to hit it a little bit more than these others that you see here, because the vocabulary of math I think is really important for us to teach to students in a very concrete way and consistently be teaching that math vocabulary to students. So in your textbook, there are a lot of really, really good strategies that have been tested over time for a long time. If you look on page 146, it talks about some websites that you can use to address some of these math deficits. But then at the end of 146, all the way through 149, it really gets through some really good strategies on how to address these deficits that research has proven work. Okay, and so I want you to really refer to those, pull resources out of that, because that's there for you to use in your classroom. And I think you will find some things that will help your students that you're working with currently related to these deficits. So again, as we look at these 4 deficits, I think this just helps us drive what kind of instruction we're going to give students, okay, what kinds of accommodations and modifications are going to help them in the general ed content-specific math classroom, but also give us really good ideas on what kind of direct instruction they need in math to fill in those gaps that they have. So we're going to take a break here, and then I want you to take a look at part 2, where we're going to get into the literacy in math and look at really how do we develop that vocabulary content knowledge for math.